So we've all been there, that impulse purchase that feels so satisfying in the moment, but leaves us with regret later on. Now, whether it's stress, maybe it's boredom, or a desire for instant gratification, emotional spending can wreak havoc on our bank accounts and hinder our financial goals. But fear not, in this episode, we're going to be exploring some practical strategies along with some examples of our own emotional spending to help you overcome your emotional spending and regain control of your finances. Hey guys, I'm Brett Nelson, founder of the Debt Free Dad. Welcome to today's show. I paid off $45,000 in debt, have been debt free now for more than 11 years outside of my mortgage. And I've been fortunate enough to help thousands of other people save and pay off tens of millions of dollars with the work that we do here at Debt Free Dad.
And I'm Amber Taylor. I saved and paid off $54,000 in just 20 months, and I've been living debt-free outside my mortgage since May of 2018.
And my name is Chris Hawkins, and my wife and I started our journey way back in 2005. And it took us about 3 years, and we paid off just under $100,000 worth of debt. And since 2008, we have been debt-free except for our house.
And my name is Ryan, and we paid off $160,000 in debt over the course of 8 years and have been debt-free about 4 years now.
Now, after listening to this episode, if you want to take this a step further in your own financial life and get better results with your finances in as little as 30 to 60 days, we're going to be sharing some details about that later on in the show. So guys, today is all about emotional spending. And to kick off the conversation today, I want to just go through this article that lists some statistics related to emotional spending. This article was written on LendingTree.com and written by Maggie Davis. She says, feeling blue. You wouldn't be alone if you use your wallet to combat your sadness. According to the latest LendingTree survey of nearly 2,000 U.S. consumers, 69% of Americans say their emotions have influenced their spending. Now, for many, their window shopping turns into wallet weeping. In fact, 76% of emotional spenders say doing so has led to their overspending. Here's what else they found. Many Americans are guilty of letting their emotions drive their spending, and their wallets feel the effects. Almost 70% of Americans admit emotions have influenced their spending habits. With millennials, 76%, Gen Z, 75%, the most likely age groups to say so. Among emotional spenders, stress is the top reason, 50%, excitement, 44%, happiness, 38% are the top feelings that fuel the shopping sprees for many people. Emotionally charged card swiping leads to regret for a lot of people. 76% of emotional spenders admit that doing so has led to overspending, and 39% of them say that they have gone into debt as a result of their emotional spending. This may contribute to why 71% of emotional spenders say they've felt guilty or regretful after mood-fueled buying. In addition, 44% say emotional spending has negatively impacted their financial well-being, high among millennials, 54%, and women, 47%. Overall, Americans are more likely to spend when they're in a positive mood, but some still seek retail therapy. Almost half of Americans have made purchases in an attempt to improve their mood, with women much more likely to do so than men, 57% versus 40%. When engaging in retail therapy, food 62%, clothing and jewelry 59%, and personal care products 40% are the top purchases. Now, half of Americans view emotionally driven spending as a normal behavior, but cutting back could help improve cash flow. 46% of Americans report being at least somewhat dissatisfied with the state of their finances, with women at 53% and Gen Xers 51% among the least content. While Gen Zers are generation most likely to love shopping, 47%, they're also the most satisfied with their finances at 68%. So guys, let's share a little bit before we kick off maybe some tips that have helped us as you guys got out of debt, or even before you got out of debt. Where were you feeling a lot of this for when it came to emotional spending? Because I know we've all dealt with it, and we probably still deal with it from time to time. In fact, if you guys have listened to this podcast long enough, there's a little drone story that's hanging out there with me. And don't get me wrong, there's other stories that go along with that one. So just because you're out of debt doesn't mean that, you don't feel the effects of emotional spending, because you're human. But maybe guys just go around the table here and just share a little bit about your experience with this and how maybe you've tried to correct it, or what's helped you guys correct it.
Honestly, I just experienced it last week. So I'll go first. No, our daughter was in the hospital for a week and she's home recovering, but it was stressful, and it was a constantly, the last week to a month, because she's been sick for a while. But we have been in and out of the hospital and going and helping her, and We used all of our emotions and we were so stressed and we went and we just bought all the food. Like, that's what we're bad at. And I heard that was a high statistic, but like, we're in it. I was like, we overspent on food so bad in the last month. It hurts my heart.
I would say for me, I'll give you a quick story of getting out of debt. Let's go way back to 1993. I think I'd been married maybe 6 months. And I was working at Circuit City, the defunct electronics store. And I was selling small electronics and computers. And if you remember back in those days, if you didn't have a screensaver, if your screen stayed on the same image, the fear was it would get stuck or burned on that image. If y'all remember that, right? You had to have a screensaver. And there was this one that came out with a little guy, animated cartoon character, who was stranded on an island. Johnny something, I don't remember what his name was, but he had all these attempts to try to get off the island. So it was like a story. And I don't know, I maxed out my credit card one day to spend $30 to buy a stupid screensaver. I couldn't tell you why. But I thought, this is just cool to sit here and watch this guy try to get off this island as a screensaver. And of course, years down the road, I think a little bit of it was maturity. A little bit of it was, why did I do that? And I want to manage my money differently. But I think for today, I mean, we're not perfect by any means. Okay. We still struggle with some of the same things. For me, I'm probably more of an emotional eater than anything. When stress or something happens, I want to solve it by eating. And of course, then that has a financial component to it where you're either eating out, buying junk food. So it's sort of like Amber. Ours is about food typically, but it's not because I want to spend money to make myself feel better. I want to spend money to get the food to make myself feel better, if that makes sense.
Total sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's the whole idea behind this, is that for some people, it's not the act of spending money; it's the thing that they're getting when they spend the money. Mm-hmm. But it's the opportunity cost, it's the financial impact of that emotional spending that's affecting so many people.
The two things for me that I think really contributed to the majority of our debt is one, Brad, we lost our mom when she was 57 years old, and I kind of took an attitude of, you only live once, and that it just put a different perspective on my life. And I was just like, I'm not going to wait for everything. So we just kind of used it as an excuse to buy stuff. And so that was the way I dealt with that, was just kind of like, buy things to, like, don't wait, because I felt like our parents did wait, and then she didn't, wasn't really able to enjoy the things that she waited for. Right. And then the other thing for me was just chasing happiness by buying stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just, if you look at all the things that we had and all the debt we had, it was that next thing is what's going to make me happy. That next purchase, that next high that I'm going to get. And it would last a week or 2 weeks or a month or 2 months. And then I'd be looking for the next high, because none of that stuff made me happy. I don't have nearly as much stuff as I used to. And I'm way more happy now than I was chasing the next thing. But that's what I spent my life doing, thinking the new car, the new house, the bigger this, the better that, that's what's going to make me. And as soon as I got it, it was like, that's boring. I want something else. I bet the next thing is going to make me happy. And then just round and round we went doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, well, I certainly can. And I'm sure most of our listeners can resonate with a lot of those things, because I think it's just normal human behavior. I think the other thing you got to keep in mind too is that, marketers and advertisers and people who sell things know this too, right? So not only are you having to battle your own inner emotions of purchases or wanting to purchase something, but they're feeding into it with the marketing and advertising and the messaging that they're giving you in those moments.
There's a reason they're selling you the cruise at the end of your cruise.
Right.
They want you on the next cruise while you're on the high of this cruise, before you leave, because they know when you leave, you're probably not going to go. But if they catch you now, you're going to buy it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think for me, it's a lot of the same types of stuff. I think I've mentioned this on this podcast plenty of times. I become an emotional spender when I get bored. I don't have a lot of things going on. I tend to start, buying things that I don't need or don't even really have a plan for. Like, for instance, the drone story, right? Never had wanted one, but it showed up one day, excellent marketing. I was like, today is the day. It wasn't in the budget, and I ended up buying it. Now, I did send it back, and I did get my money back because I felt so awful for it. But yeah, I think it's the things that you go through in life that I think is what we all deal with, but it's the financial impact that you have to be really concerned about. And I think for a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck, even you look at the percentage of people who have a budget. I think Gallup came out with a poll a while back ago that shared like 33% of households have a household budget. That means 66 to 67% of households don't have a household budget. So when you start having these emotional spending habits pop up and you don't have a budget, you don't have a plan, you don't really have anything that you're working towards with your finances, it's easy to just keep that spending going and going and going. Before you know it, you turn around and you're facing a mountain of credit card debt and financial stress.
Yeah, and it's not just though like the stress emotional spending, it's also the excited, happy, fun emotional spending too that happens, right? I would have like a good sales night and I'd be like, yeah, I did awesome. I'm calling my husband like, meet me at this bar, blah, blah, blah. We're going to have some drinks. And then I'm spending all my money I just made, right? Because we're celebrating. So it's not just like the stress or the boredom. It's also like celebration where you could get caught emotionally spending.
Right. You have those little celebrations too when you go grocery shopping, I bet too, right? You go grocery shopping, you get all the food and you're like, we did it. We got all the food. Let's go get something to eat.
Right.
You go out to eat.
I asked my brother a couple of years ago. One of my brothers, when he was younger, spent some time in drug addiction. And it puzzles me to this day, and stay with me on this story here, by the way. It puzzles me to this day how many people overdose and die of drug overdoses. So I asked my brother, I said, how is it that people who can gain that kind of addiction? And he says, well, you start with one drug and you get a high from it. And Ryan, you were talking about the high a minute ago. This is what made me think of this. And it's great and it's wonderful. And the next time you do that drug, it doesn't quite have the same effect. And so you try more of it and you're chasing that same high. And when you don't get it, you switch to a different drug. And all of a sudden, boom, there's that high again. But you can't replicate it. So you try the next drug. And next thing you know, you find yourself, really going down a path. So I think a lot of it is it's chemicals in the brain that when we have that good feeling, we want it again. And so for a lot of us, Ryan, and you hit the nail on the head here, I think this is going to make me feel good. Let me go buy it. And when it doesn't, you get upset. And so maybe I've got to spend more money, or I've got to spend on something bigger, something greater to try to get that same feeling in my head, in my mind, chemically, and you just never get it. So I know one of the things we wanted to talk about is identifying triggers. What is it that if you'll pay attention and follow, you'll probably start to see a common theme. The same thing that triggers you wanting to go out and spend, or the same thing for me, and I'm having to try to pay attention to this. What is the trigger that makes me want to go out and eat more, eat unhealthy? Yeah. Because only then can you find something to replace that trigger with something more positive.
Certainly. Like for me, I don't know if I would, I guess it is. It's an emotional spending habit is that, since I started this business nearly 8 years ago and I started working from home, it's a pretty lonely job working from home all the time by yourself. And so, for me, I noticed that I started spending more money going out to eat and being out and about because I needed to get out of the house and have some sort of personal interaction with real people. Because, we're all online, our whole business is online. So all you're doing is either on your phone or on your computer most of the day. And, I was beginning just to feel like so drained and tired and just wanting to be out, even if it was just hanging out with people, not necessarily communicating with them, but you're just amongst other people, whether you're at a restaurant or a bar or just hanging out, So, I think that those, like you mentioned, Chris, the triggers, it's so important to recognize that. I mean, it's okay that I go out and do that. I just have to be mindful that it doesn't get out of hand.
And I think too, the emotion of the world we live in right now is you can get caught up in the emotions of everybody else. Especially when it comes to social media, you can get caught up in, and even before social media, I definitely would get caught up in this emotion of, everybody's in the same boat. Everybody's living paycheck to paycheck. Everybody's doing this. So it gives you this justification and reason to overspend and not pay attention and just do all the wrong things because your emotions are like, hey, Johnny's doing it, Jimmy's doing it, all my friends are doing it, I'm going to do it. And so everybody gets together and the emotions are like, it's this, it's that, this is the reason I'm broke. And it's suddenly you're like marching with everyone else. This is all the reasons I'm broke. And meanwhile, it's like 90% of the reason you're broke is you, not all those reasons you're listing. You're just getting into the emotion of what everybody else is saying.
But Ryan, it's like you're setting the ball in the tee for me, because one of the other things I wanted to bring up is, you are your own worst financial enemy. I used to preach this to my students. And as soon as you can recognize that you are your own worst financial enemy, then you can start to think about the future and the decisions that you can change and the things that you can do different than what you were doing before to start getting on a different path. So that I think a big thing when it comes to emotional spending is recognize that you are going to sabotage yourself if you don't put things in place like a budget, like automating a lot of your bills or your expenses. We've talked about the power of envelopes, using envelopes, putting money in there, and it's a visual cue, and know that when you're out of money in the envelope, you're out of money in the envelope.
For a lot of people that we work with, including myself at one time, switching over to more cash system, like using the envelope system. And I think the other thing is just setting yourself up, have some spending limits, budget, in my opinion, it's like you're going to emotionally spend. It's going to happen. So why not just determine what are the things that I emotionally spend on? And I'm going to say, it's okay for me to spend money on this, but we are going to have a limit for it. And once we reach the limit, then we're done. And that's where the real hard work comes in, is when that limit is reached, you got to really stick to the plan until the next month comes. And that takes a lot of time, patience, and practice, and you're not going to get it right all the time. But I think switching over to more of a cash system and setting those limits, using a budget, and really just being more mindful of your spending and aligning that with some of your goals that you want to reach. Maybe it's building your emergency fund. Maybe it's paying down credit cards, whatever it might be. But the more of that kind of stuff you do, the better progress you'll make. And also, by giving yourself permission that it's okay to emotionally spend as long as we're doing it within our means, you're not going to feel the overwhelming amount of guilt that you would if you hadn't planned for it at all, or you made this really strict budget and you didn't allow for any of that spending, and then you go out and spend it, and now you have to deal with all this guilt that you messed it up. So give yourself some flexibility there, and I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, and I'd say too, like, wait before you buy something, especially if it's like a bigger ticket item. And a lot of the times we'll hear members in Roots say this too, and they're like, I'm just waiting 24 hours, and then they forget about what they even were thinking about buying that day while they were out, or maybe they're at Target and they're like, ooh, I really want this. And then they wait 24 hours and they don't go back, right? So having that little bit of time buffer can actually make a huge difference on that emotional spending.
Yeah, I can imagine how many people are listening to this whose Amazon carts are full of purchases they haven't made yet.
I had something in my Amazon cart last night, and Paul went and purchased it, my husband. And he goes, yeah, I ordered the thing you had in the cart. And I was like, but I didn't even know if I really wanted it. And he just ordered it. It's like, what are you doing?
I think I went in my cart one time. I had things like in there from like a year ago. It's still
crazy.
I think too, like taking an inventory, kind of looking around, we did this, like looking around at all the stuff you currently have and kind of looking at it and saying, is all the stuff I have, is this, like, am I looking around and saying, oh my gosh, my life is exactly where I want it to be because of all this stuff I mean, I bet if you went through your last 5 years of stuff you've bought, you probably can't even remember 90% of it, 95% of it, because it's just stuff. And I think we all get stuck in this. And it's like, for us, like a big trigger was we lived in a big house in a nice neighborhood, and the trigger was keeping up with the Joneses, keeping up with everybody else. And we got out of that. We sold and downsized and moved to a regular, just a normal house in a normal neighborhood. And it just was amazing at all the crap we would buy, and that just added nothing to our lives, added nothing to like where we wanted to get to and what we were trying to accomplish. Was just junk. And I think that's just a good exercise, is look around at all the stuff you have. And it's like, Are you happy?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. After, Sarah passed away, having to go through someone's things after they're gone, it's like you start to begin to realize like how worthless stuff really is. And it's like it's made me really rethink anything that I purchase as far as like physical, tangible things. And it's amazing how much stuff that I really just don't buy anymore. I just don't care. We went to Florida for a vacation a couple weeks ago, and we didn't bring anything back. No souvenirs, no nothing. Kids didn't even really ask. I didn't even go to the stores with them or anything. Didn't push it. And it's just like because I know all of that stuff is really meaningless at the end of the day, And yeah, so that's given me a completely different perspective on stuff and how worthless things really are. But it's amazing how stressed and crazy we'll get for chasing after like the Stanley Cups right now. People are going crazy for these things, and how much effort and energy we put into all this junk that at the end of the day it just doesn't really matter. So the other thing you guys can do too is look for areas of support. Obviously, this podcast is an avenue of support for you. Listen on a regular basis. If you're someone who's constantly struggling with overspending, emotional spending, having a hard time sticking to your financial plan, that's one of the reasons why we do this show. It's to help people stay on track. It's to give them support. It's to give them encouragement. It's to share other people who are doing this, to share that other people are out there fighting for this just as much as you are. So look for those. Get inside our Facebook group, Life Without Payments. Start getting yourself around different people who are having different conversations about money and getting away from that paycheck to paycheck herd mentality. The more support that you have, the better things that we'll get for you.
We've all said in this podcast today that even today, we'll do some emotional spending. So I think the big thing for you listening out there is you got to give yourself some grace. Okay, it's going to happen from time to time. Recognize that it's going to happen. And when it does, hopefully it's within the budget. If not, learn from it. The support's a big part of it, both from asking for help, asking for advice, but also being there and being willing to help others, particularly as you progress through your journey. That's the big thing I think I get out of this podcast, is knowing that I'm helping other people out by telling about my journey, by telling about the things that I've learned. It allows me a chance to give back and to participate. So there's that sort of give and take with the support. Give yourself grace, and then finally practice some contentment. Be happy with where you are, what you have today, but always strive to be better tomorrow. There's nothing that says you can't have the things you want in the future, but just be happy with what you have today. Develop a plan, develop goals to accomplish those things or get those things that you want down the road, and find the joy in the moment. And I think that'll help a lot of times with some of that emotional spending.
Yeah, just a little dig at Chris. For those of you who don't know, Chris owns an ice cream shop, so I'm sure he's a big fan of emotional spending. When you had a rough day, you go get some ice cream.
I tell people we're in the happy business. When you come in, you may not be happy, but when you leave, you're happy.
Right. All right, guys. So if you want to pay off debt, save more money, and take control of your finances and start seeing some better results here in just the next 30 to 60 days, all you have to do is head over to debtfreedad.com, click on the green button at the top of the page, and we're going to show you how to get started with just a short video.
And that sound means it's time for the celebrations of the show. First, we have Brenda. I paid off a small loan I had, one step closer to being debt-free.
Yeah, that's awesome, Brenda. Congratulations. Caroline says, canceling unnecessary subscriptions plus being so close to paying 2 large medical bills off. Caroline, that's fantastic. Congrats.
And Nicolette says, I carried over some money from my bi-weekly budget to put it into a future bucket for my clothing category.
Yeah, there you go. Budgeting win there for sure.
And Patrice Johnson, a new Blackstone that I paid for with cash. Brad, this is your fault, she says. She's been wanting one since the first podcast when I heard you talk about it.
That's awesome. But Patrice, you paid cash for it. You are going to love it. I cannot live without mine. All right, guys. As always, congratulations to all of you guys who are taking a stand for your financial life and are wanting better. We get that getting out of debt is not easy. But with our help and with your consistency and discipline, we promise you this will be some of the best work that you guys do in your entire life. Thanks for joining us for today's show, and we will see you guys on the next episode.